When I tell you that this video has been in the making for 2 months, I want to offer you some context. I'm recently laid off marketing professional from the corporate world, and I'm not really planning to return. So I decided I want to do what I love doing the most, is talk about technology, automotive, drones, cameras. And so hopefully you're here for the right reason. And for the 140 something people that subscribe based on just 4 or 5 videos, you're the real ones. I've come across a gentleman named Adam from Sony at a recent event, and he was kind enough to instill some trust in me and offer me 2 cameras to test. One that's a technological marvel, and the other one that offers a huge resolution. And so I, as an avid Fujifilm shooter, I'm gonna test the A9 III and the A7R5. Let's do it. The Sony A9 III has been making the headlines recently, and it shows Sony's clear intention on penetrating the sports market, the sports professional market, in preparation for next year's Olympic Games in Paris. This shoots 120 frames per second, which, let me just demonstrate. Sounds ridiculous. But yeah, there's no more missed moments. There's pre-capture as well, so you can set up to 1 second, I believe. Before pressing the shutter button, it already captures images and it stores it in the camera's internal memory. So there's really no way that you can miss your shot. Hello, doggy. A corgi just appeared behind me. But yeah, I'm gonna go to a water polo match tomorrow. And I'm also gonna go to a football match the day after. So I'm gonna have 2 real life scenarios to test this camera out. And just for the sake of pleasure, there's no memory card in here yet, but I just wanna demonstrate again. Isn't that ridiculous? It turns you into a photography Rambo. Come on, let's do this. All right, let me demonstrate. This is now being filmed by the Fujifilm, which doesn't have a global shutter. So you can see that the propeller seems bent every now and then. And if I now grab a hold of the Sony, but with the A9 III, the propellers are exactly as they look in real life. I've also got 2 events that I'm going to tonight. One is my friend's street photography exhibition, but I may or may not shoot there, it might not be appropriate. And the second one is a German band's concert, because I do want to see what it would be like to do concert photography with a full frame and with a Sony. So yeah, but that's mostly going to be the A7R5, because I'm curious as to how that performs. So, as the drone demonstration there hopefully showed, allow me to explain what the big deal is about. So, the A9 III is the first full-frame global shutter camera, right? Let's clear what that means in very simple, very high-level overview. 36 by 24 millimeters is the size of the sensor that's inside when you look into the camera, and that gives it the traditional 35 millimeter film perspective and field of view. That's what people refer to as full frame. The second thing is the global shutter, and if you want to know, full frame allows you to bring in more light into the sensor than the daily shooter I'm using, which is a Fujifilm, by around 30% from my calculations. And the global shutter refers to the fact that that sensor, which in traditional rolling shutter cameras, which have been on the market for a long time now, reads the image line by line. And that's why you saw the propellers of the drone slightly bent, because the information presented itself differently from the top line than the bottom one. When it comes to sports photography, high-speed action, that sort of warping can happen, right? And the global shutter eliminates all of that by reading the sensor same time across all the lines, right? So for sports photography, that's really, really important. And that's what all the rage is about. Even though technically some other companies have patented full-frame global sensors, they've never actually made it to market. Canon is probably gonna follow, but Sony beat them to it, and that's a big deal. Very cool thing. Toyotas don't let you park into things. All right, we're here. I'm gonna go in. It's a tiny photo pit, so I'm not gonna be vlogging or anything, and it's like 15 minutes to the show starts. So I'm gonna take the A7R5. I want to see if the larger sensor and the larger resolution are something to consider for myself in the future. But I'm also gonna take my own X-H2s with a 20mm equivalent prime and a sort of 2470 zoom. So yeah, once I edit the photos, I'll let you know what I think about them. Hopefully see some real life examples of a full frame advantage. So cool, let's do it. So I just finished editing last night's photos, just the best ones that I think I'll use for social media. I didn't get to take the Fujifilm out, and that's particularly because we had like 15 photographers in a pit that's not more than 3 feet wide. So we had to put our bags in one of the corners, and so I just took the Sony immediately. And to be honest with you, I'm glad, because I've shot plenty of concerts on that stage. So we're going to compare those exact two lenses that I mentioned, but just from another concert. Same lights, same in-house team. But what's really interesting is I was expecting to be able to go maybe lower ISO on the Sony. And so if we go and have a look at some of the images, for instance, this photo pit is literally so close that you could just reach out and shake hands with the musicians. So it's quite an interesting one. So this one was with the 1635 2.8. These are denoised, but you do still see some noise, so it's not overly used. Phenomenal amount of detail on a 61 megapixel sensor, and it wasn't slow in any way, and it didn't have any sort of downsides, that's for sure. So that's one point to the Sony. Now if we look at something like let's see, this image, which wasn't very close, but once it loads, and definitely Lightroom does take a lot longer with a 61 megapixel Sony image, there's very, very good amount of depth of field. So another point for Sony's full frame is that it just separates foreground and background much better. Very, very good images, but if you look at the data, yeah, I mean, anything under 250th of a second, this was a metal show, so lots of movement, lots of rapid movement, so those shots didn't make it anything below 200th of a second, but definitely very, very good, and the Sony cleans up incredibly well. I really don't see any difference. Most of these, I mean, this one I had to go up to 5,000 because of the conditions in terms of ISO, 160th of a second, and there's really nothing that would tell you to go anything faster than that. And if we go over to the Fuji files, okay, this one was shot with a prime, so we're gonna we're gonna discount that one. But for instance, this one was the sort of 2470 equivalent. Once again, 3200 at 2.8. So almost 400th of a second, plenty of light, perfectly exposed, cleaned up very well. There's really nothing there that would make me think, okay, this is unusable, there's good level of detail. I really can't tell you anything. I was expecting some drastic differences between the APS-C and full frame, and I can tell you this with all honesty, it's not good lighting in that venue. This is a black and white image. This one I lifted the subject a little bit because it was quite dark. But again, nothing that a little bit of denoising wouldn't clean up, to be honest with you. This is a good example, just the level of detail that you get from a 26 megapixel stacked sensor. There's a bit of movement in his chin, 250th of a second. But I mean, there's nothing I can say that's bad about either of these cameras. The two major advantages that you get with the Sony is, yeah, that background separation, so that full frame look, and definitely lets in more light. I just didn't really see that much of a drastic difference. You compensate with either shutter speed, or you raise your ISO. But the Fujifilm noise is quite pleasing to the eye, so you can clean that up if you want to. You can leave it in for, you know, sort of a vintage look if that's what you're going for, because black and white is timeless, for instance. But absolutely, I mean, it was a great show. They did use quite good lights, to be honest with you, so we started out fairly well. Yeah, this was a cool moment, a little kid, but maybe just a little too late for a kid at that age to be going out there. But yeah, I would say overall, it's phenomenal. It did fill up the card. I did take a lot of burst shots. It's a 160 gig card you can fill up. But that's the thing with the 61 megapixel sensors, you get such huge files. Yeah, overall really, really good. I didn't see anything that was sort of problematic, easy to set up, your burst modes, your focus zones. Good stuff overall. And now off to the water polo match. Wish me luck. All right, so just taking a breather after the first quarter, but this camera is ridiculous. I quickly had to ditch the A7RV because even in its fastest setting, it's just not there. But just have a look at this, and I'm sure I'll show you later on in a better way. You cannot miss a single frame using pre-capture and 120 frames a second. So, all right, let's keep doing this. I'll tell you what, turns out water polo is one of the toughest sports to shoot. So, yeah, that's the thing. Getting a camera and then the next day trying to shoot a specific sport that has water droplets before every player and before every key moment is not easy. I mean, the A9 III is an absolute beast and in a league of its own. Yeah, it's awesome. I'm going to review the images at some point and let you know how I feel. I did take the Fujifilm out, but very quickly realized that there's a lot of caveats to that 15 frames a second mechanical shutter, and I wasn't gonna be dealing with the banding from the LED lights. So yeah, definitely a win for the A9 III, even over the A7R5. That speed is just unmatched. So yeah, tomorrow, football game, and I can't wait because apparently that's a whole lot easier according to the other members of press to shoot. So hopefully even more success tomorrow. All right, excuse the bad audio. Here it is, the press room. It's my first time. I'm a complete novice in this, so all right, I'm excited, man. Football, let's do it. Press, baby. All right, there's no video cameras allowed here, so I'm just gonna quickly do this before I go downstairs. It's gonna be awesome, and yeah, I'm sure the A9 III is gonna be an absolute beast here. So let's do this. Halftime. Not a particularly exciting match. Lots of misses. To be honest with you, haven't really captured anything. Anything of a money shot. So yeah, we'll see how the second half goes. I believe if they win, they'll be champions. So maybe we'll just take a lot of celebration photos. But the cameras are incredible. There's nothing really else to say. But one thing I did notice is you don't necessarily want 1 second of pre-capture because it uses the camera's internal buffer. And so if you've got 1 second already pre-captured before you press it, even if you're good enough to capture the right moment, you're missing out on that 120 frames a second. You've pretty much got like 50 frames left there, which is, if you calculate, around 0.4 seconds. So yeah, just need to change a few settings here and there and hopefully capture a goal or two. That would be really exciting. So awesome. Let's review these images, and just so none of you say I don't own any Canon products, right here is a great Canon printer. So water polo as well as football done. I was able to use both Sony cameras and the Fujifilm, the water polo, but by the time I got to football the next day, no, I just thought, you know what, let's concentrate on Sony. But overall, what an insane last few years for Sony. I mean, their autofocus game is, you know, the best. There's no doubt here. Water polo, I quickly found out, and hats off to anybody who's a professional sports photographer, is really hard, both for
the operator of the camera as well as the camera itself and the autofocus systems to capture because of this. I mean, there's water droplets everywhere before the ball or the player or the action that's happening. So you can sort of try, and that's how I went to market with this. I tried sort of zone autofocus, but I'd ended up capturing a lot of times the water that would splash up. So then I'd enable something like face detection or eye detection, whichever is applicable in which camera. And that's when the real difference shows. And I'm just gonna quickly cover the Fujifilm that I sort of just used for briefly 5 minutes, not more. It did capture some really good shots. There is color science behind Fujifilm that everybody likes, and these are edited as well as denoised, so just keep that in mind. But it could keep up. I mean, it can capture not up to 15 frames a second. For some reason, I can never get it to do 15 frames mechanically. And I wasn't going to deal with the LED banding indoors because there were a lot of LED lights and it was flickering. So yeah, good shots overall. It does most of the time see where the player is, but it doesn't always actually capture the player. And if I just want to show you this, so when you go into burst shots, that's the issue here. These are just JPEGs. I'm just going to quickly show you here. 6 or 7 shots, right? Rapid succession within a second. You can see the time here behind, time of the penalty, and time of the quarter left. In focus, out of focus, out of focus, in focus, in focus, in focus, right? So 7 frames to out of focus. Yeah, that's a bit of an issue. And if we look at this one here, even with subject detection on, it can see where the person is, but the lens and the camera and the image processor just don't communicate. And so you end up focusing on the water, somewhat focusing on the subject, and then it just goes completely berserk. And then it focuses on Mr. Coach here. I mean, just all over the place. And I mean, you can argue that maybe I don't know what I'm doing, but the thing is, if you have to convince yourself that you have to master the knowledge of how to shoot with a specific camera, with a specific lens, in a specific setting, at a certain f-stop, and whereas you just pick up a Sony the same way you pick up an iPhone and you just point and shoot pretty much, that's up for consideration. So overall, really, really good. And then football, I just concentrated fully on the Sonys. And let me tell you, first of all, it does freeze on. I literally got the camera and the lens together when, as part of the game, their mascot, the eagle, flies from one end of the stadium onto this little podium here, which, yeah, I mean, it does have little mangled pieces of what looks like a mouse. Trigger warning. But yeah, just a lot of detail. This was captured. This was the A9 III, yeah. So I immediately put the 200-600 on it. Later on, I swapped to 7200 because we were quite close to the field. But yeah, even 24 megapixels, lots of detail. All of these are denoised, but mind you, with the Sony, minimal denoising needed. So just be aware, it's really, really good on that front. I've heard a lot of people ask me, oh, wow, is that the A9 III? What about noise? Not really something to worry about these days. So just keep that in mind. Plenty of detail there. Let's have a look at these images. So this is a little bit further away. The teams held a 1-minute memorial. Beautiful separation between foreground, midground, background. So really, you get that full frame look. But at 120 FPS, which is incredible. You're able to freeze the action, and let me tell you, I mean, it's easier than water polo for sure, because there's no water splashing everywhere all the time. But this is fast action, and there's multiple players here, and I enabled subject detection for a while, then I just went center fix. I tried all the focus zones and modes, and I mean, you get the shot almost every time. So over the course of those 3 events, I shot 11,000 photos, and I had to actually go and hunt for things that the Sony missed. For instance, here, I mean, no, it doesn't miss. It's still around here, but maybe my shutter speed was a little low on that one. But I can show you this one, for instance, where, yeah, the previous frames were all on the players, and then it went on to the crowd, so it focused on the background. This one was 120 FPS burst, and in the last moment, for some reason, even though subject detection was on, hey, it decided to pick the background. But again, could have been user error, and so I got 100 frames of blurry foreground. Very good. I also wanted to show this image where I was focused on the action happening there in the penalty box, and this player just sprinted across the scene. And I think there's no doubt that if this wasn't a Sony, this would have at one point or another jumped over to the player here in the foreground, because that was definitely in the center autofocus zone, and yet it remained fully focused throughout the whole series of shots on the action happening in the middle. That was immediately the moment I knew what I was thinking about this entire Sony autofocus system. So yeah, very, very cool. Overall, I think I found around 10 frames apart from this burst that was out of focus. So incredible. And Fuji is famous for its color science, but Sony, as long as you do the little cap custom white balance trick before you start shooting, I don't see any reason to worry about the colors. It does every now and then. I know that I'll show you this one here, which I already edited, so it's not how it came out, but there is a shot where the crowd, and I know it was golden hour, but this came out like super yellow. This is not even what it looked like. Yeah, so this is what it sort of looked like. I just edited this, so it looked like what it looked on the JPEGs, and so there's some discrepancy there. But really, the only thing that sort of changed the colors, because a lot of people say, "Oh, Sony colors," and I know A7S III is what my wedding was shot in, and sometimes we look yellow, like almost Simpsons yellow. So once the game was over, they won. They had enough points to definitely win the championship, and so they were prepared for the crowd to storm the field, which is great. But all the pyro that they set off started producing some weird colors. That's all I could say. Apart from this, you got two incredible machines. The A7R5 has really, really high megapixel count. And you can just crop so much, and then the A9 III, you can still crop quite a lot, but you just don't miss a moment. I saw the other photographers, Canon, Nikon. The only people that used Sonys were one or two people shooting video for highlights for the club themselves. But members of the press, contract, Canon, Nikon, maybe they bring their own one or two lenses that they have, but they have a contract. So I don't really understand why that is, at least in our region. Sony is insanely capable, and there's just so much detail in these shots that you can go into. Yeah, so you can count the individual hairs on people. Let's see what this one was shot with. A9 III. These were, I believe, all A9 III. This one, a shot of the eagle. That was A7R5. And I mean, just wow. So much that you can do with a sensor like this. Here's the game ball that they pick up as they walk out. And need I say more? There's minimal noise anyway, but this is all completely acceptable. And if I can just conclude this part with one thing, is that no matter who you are, if you're thinking about buying this camera, then you probably, just like myself, we ain't got nothing on these camera operators. The way they pull focus and move around and follow and whip on, by the way, Fujinon cameras, it's incredible. So I had the pleasure of sort of shadowing this gentleman and another one on the other side of the field in the second half. incredible. So overall, all I can say is phenomenal cameras. They freeze the action. This one is a cropped image, but even with 24 megapixels, there's just so much that you can do. Yeah. Phenomenal match, and once again, a great opportunity for me to test these. So yeah, there's really no moment that you can miss. I mean, I've got this entire sequence from the ball going from over here as the player shot it to the point where it made contact. Even there was a scene where it was questionable whether the ball was in or not, and I could just quickly flick back and have a look frame by frame and see that it wasn't in, so it was the right call. The match ended up being a 0-0 draw, but yeah, it's really, really good. And for sports, A9 III, phenomenal. A7R5 is slow, but I think that has very, very different uses. Yeah, here's the aforementioned situation, which wasn't actually in. Very good. Well, that's really all I've got to say about this.
So I've now returned 4 days later to the scene where we started this video, and I'm on my way back to Sony to give these two amazing cameras back. And let me be honest, this couldn't have come at a worse time for Fujifilm, because their recent 6.0 firmware update on their flagship X-H2s, which is the one I bought with my own money, has received severe criticism, including from myself. And it's April 2024, and hopefully this is going to be just a one-time thing, but it's taken the Fujifilm back to the playground where it's had its ass whooped in terms of autofocus, and this is hands down the best that you can get on the market. The A9 III is a 120 FPS beast that really, in around 11,000 shots taken, missed maybe 20 of them. I had to go through almost every single burst shot frame by frame to look for things that it's missed, and once you set it up the right way with the right zones, it really doesn't miss. And the A7R5 is a gorgeous 61 megapixel beast as well, that you can really crop and pull data out of, even at the expense of humongous files. But once you get over it, it's great. But I can't help but think that, with the exception of a global shutter, which has very, very good implications for future cameras, there is a camera that does sort of these two. It has a stacked sensor, it's fast enough for most sports, and it does have around 50 megapixels as well to play with, and that's the A1. And if the A1 gets a facelift with a stacked sensor that's even better, or a global shutter, which would be the real deal, that's the camera I'm going to save up for. It has the best of both worlds, and it's amazing. Just little things that you learn over just a few days that I've had with this camera. Stuff like being able to record a video as I'm doing now, and just being able to switch off stuff like face detection or eye detection, or switch over to animal detection. Things that you can do on Sony for years, you still can't do on the Fujifilm. So it is what it is. There's a reason why people are talking about it. I don't see the whole full frame argument. I don't really want to go into it. And frankly, that's not something that I care about. Both of them clean up very well in post-production. But stuff that really cripples the Fujifilm is currently still not being fixed. And whether that's a fundamental issue or not, I'll leave a video in the description below so that you can see what this whole 6.0 firmware upgrade problem is about. But irregardless, right, these two are still winning every day. You pick them up and they get the job done. And that's why most professionals are saying, when it comes to making money, they pick up a Sony, a Canon, or a Nikon. It's those three, really, that get the job done. So thanks for watching again, and I hope to see you in the next one. Honestly, amazing cameras. Thank you, Sony, again. And now I'm going to go back and pick up the cameras before somebody takes them.